This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Skye Jackson, a New Orleans-based writer and poet who teaches at Xavier University in New Orleans. She is a poet and critic whose work explores the complex and various forms of Black life, from the social life of violence to the intimate life of embodiment in familial and romantic relationships. Along with a number of poems and journals and edited collections, she is the co-author with Santos Calavera of Vaster Grave from 2019 and author of the collection Libre from 2025. In this conversation, we explore the place of poetry in articulating the meaning of Black life, the past and future possibilities of the poetic word, and how reading, study, and contemplation settle inside creative work. Good afternoon, Skye. How are you today?
I'm doing well, John. How are you?
As I was saying before I hit record, my grades are due tomorrow, so I'm 24 hours from absolute liberation from a long academic year. I know you feel the same.
Oh, yes, totally.
So I'm happy about that, but I'm also been really looking forward to our conversation as part of this podcast series. You know, we've been working for a while to expand our conversations with writers and artists. And so having your contribution as a writer is so essential. I think it's very easy to slip into the idea that Black Studies is a sort of academic department with historians and critics but of course, we all teach creative work. And so having people doing creative work is absolutely crucial to this being a really responsible and coherent podcast. So I love that I have a chance to get you on the series and add to that dimension of our work. So thank you for your time. Welcome to the Black Studies Podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about, you know, how you think about your own writing as a writer and poet, and sort of its relation to the past and future of Black poetry, Black writing. But I wanted to start off really with a more personal question and ask you, you know, what as a writer drew you to work on Black life? Like, what were those experiences, whether it's childhood, educational, communal, political, that brought writing and Black life together for you?
Well, as a Black woman, you know, I think that that's always been integral to my writing progress, my progress as a writer, my process as a writer, all of that. I was born and raised in New Orleans, and so I grew up steeped in a very Black culture. And so it really wasn't until, though, I was maybe in grad school that I really started to write about Blackness in, I think, a more pronounced way. And I think I was inspired by the poet Toy Derricott and the way that she wrote about Blackness and race and passing and all of those things, which were things that always fascinated me. But I wasn't, sometimes in order to write about something, I feel like I have to have like a window to write about it, you know? And so I think looking at her work, I was kind of able to say, oh, this is how other people are doing it. So maybe I can do it this way also, you know? And so that's sort of how I began to sort of lean into that in a deeper way, I think.
Do you feel like, I mean, it's interesting to ask this question, you know, we were talking before, so I knew that you're from New Orleans, and it's interesting to me, like how New Orleans is almost a shorthand, right? For, you know, you say, well, I was born and raised in New Orleans, and therefore, you know, did you feel like that sort of the sort of communal, political, social, whatever you want to call it, cultural life of New Orleans was what really cultivated that, or was education itself also a part of that? You know, I mean, you mentioned graduate school, but you said not until graduate school. So I'm also curious about how sort of being a writer and thinking about Black life as a creative person, you know, how that relates to that longer arc of education for you.
Yeah, you know, I would say that they both play a hand, you know, education and culture. I started my work as a poet when I was 14 years old at the New Orleans Center of Creative Arts. And it's our basically our performing arts conservatory here in New Orleans. And so that's where I began writing about poetry, but I wasn't like writing about blackness or what it meant to be like, I was like writing about like going to the beach with my parents, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
it sort of took a while for that to sort of bubble up. Even though I was having different experiences, I didn't know that those were experiences that I should be writing about at that time, I mean, I think when you're starting something, you're kind of just it's like the training wheels, you're like, "Okay,
Yeah.
let me make sure I can figure out how to do this," right? And so as I continued my sort of practice, that started to deepen. And I remember in college, I was trying to write short stories about Blackness, but I had this horrible professor who was like, "These stories are not universal, blah, 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 blah," So I think I actually started writing about Black life in a short story before I began to write about it in poetry, but then was like
Hmm.
sort of like rudely and, just rebuffed by like my professor at the time. And then I was just like, "Oh, I'm not good at writing short stories." And I just like put it all away.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's just interesting, and maybe that was a reason why it took me so long to write about it because when I was in college, I was told that, these weren't universal topics that people could relate to.
Interesting.
And so you just take that and sometimes you internalize it and sometimes you say, "You know what? Screw you,"
Yeah, yeah.
But being so sort of like impressionable, I think I think I internalized it as a young writer, in probably a negative way.
It was interesting, you used in your first part of your response, you said, "I need a window in to sort of write." And it's interesting, then you were also talking about, this sort of initial writing was, I was just writing about going to the beach with my parents. Is that sort of like immersed, like you're inside. And so you hadn't had that moment of stepping outside in order to look back in. So there's an interesting kind of spatialization of that window in, but also that sense of you sort of describing that first foray into writing as writing really just inside the experience. I didn't know that because you are not from the 18th century. I did not know that universal was still a thing that we were really pushing on writers. So that's
Well, I
that's
don't think it
that's
is
troubling.
now, but it was then. I mean, that
Yeah.
was like 2000. I graduated from college in like 2012. So that had to be like, you know, 2010, 2011 or whatever when I had that particular professor, and I think the way that we're talking about literature has changed a lot. And then my professor was an older white guy. He was like this older white dude, he thought, I think my story was about colorism. It was about, you know, two friends who are trying to navigate a situation of colorism where, it's two girls and the boy well, that one of them likes the lighter skinned girl or whatever. It was like about that. And so he was like, "That's just not a universal story. Like people are not gonna understand this." And I'm just like, okay, which looking back, it's like, that's horrible critique. Like, you're
Yeah, it
not
really
telling
is.
me anything about, like, the technical parts of it. How do you make it better? Like, and I think that's a lesson I take from that as, an educator, as a teacher. Is like, okay, give people feedback that they can use, not that just like is demoralizing and you can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, what? Like, that's not your sort of lane to even enter to tell me that. Your lane is to say, okay, let's talk about character. Let's talk about plot. Let's talk about structure. Let's talk about all those things, right? And if
Mhm.
all those things are working, then that's what you need to be happening there. So I don't know. It's just, I always cite that professor because it was such an intense moment. But I've also talked to other people, who went to that I was at LSU, who went to LSU, and they had the same experience with that professor. So it wasn't
Huh.
just me. He just did this to everyone apparently.
Well, you should, I don't know if he was a published writer, but it'd be great to just send a novel of his back with a little inscription on the front, not universal.
Right, not universal.
Turns out, that's not really a position anybody writes from.
Yes.
Um, well, let me ask you another sort of way into talking about your writing. Of course, writing isn't something that just sort of follows like some inspiration muse. It's a whole process of various kinds of techniques and training and practice and all of that. But I wanted to ask specifically what the role of study is in your writerly practice.
I think for a poet, there's different levels of study. So for me, there's research, but I also feel like I study people and I
Hmm.
study patterns and that helps me to write. Paying attention to people and patterns, I think is a huge part of being a poet. I think it's a huge part of being a writer, is being able to identify patterns and then attribute those patterns and then sort of spin those patterns into something for other people to interpret. And so I find that I'm always sort of studying people's patterns.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's really important to me. And of course, going down research rabbit holes about, trying to always follow my obsessions. Like, okay, where is this obsession leading? Why am I being drawn to this particular subject or story or experience? Like, what about it is drawing me in, and figuring that out is important. Also studying the things that scare me. I think writing about the things that scare you is very important. Um, and so, yeah, I think that the study or the practice of study is sort of, multifaceted,
Uh-huh.
when it pertains to those different things, for me in particular as a writer.
Yeah, I like the way you put that when you said obsession, right? What are my obsessions and sort of following those, but also observing yourself and the observing patterns in others. I mean, that's um, any of your friends who listen to this are going to be like, wait, what is she observing when we spend time together? But I think actually all levels of writing, I mean, I'm not a creative writer, I'm a theorist, but I understand what you mean by that, the identifying patterns and actually observing self and other obsessively um, generates questions and also generates insight. So I like
Yeah.
that you identified that with study rather than just sort of a habit or a curiosity.
Yeah, no, I always think about that. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday in my hairstyle, so I was getting my hair done, and she was telling me this story, and I was like, "Well, you tend to have done this and this and this and this in that scenario." And she was like, "How do you know that?" And I was like, "I just pay attention to patterns." And she was like, "I never thought about this." And I was like, "Well," I said, "I can't tell you what it means, but I can tell you what you're doing,
Mm.
because I'm paying attention to it." Um, and I don't know. I've just always been that way. I don't know why, but I think it's useful as a writer. Even, we were talking about your study of James Baldwin. Like, I think that these figures like Baldwin, they are very much married to their patterns as well too, right? And
Yeah.
so it's interesting to study figures like that for their patterns as well. So,
Yeah, I mean, Baldwin in his nonfiction describes himself as a witness. And,
yeah.
I mean, there's many, many dimensions to that idea of witness. And one of them is obsessive observation of a pattern. And in terms of nonfiction, at least, I think the greatest nonfiction of the 20th century, James Baldwin.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Um, so let me ask you then, thinking about your work, sort of uh, in a I don't quite know how to phrase this, but then like a big sort of picture, a big sort of claim. What is it that your current work as a writer wants to say about Black life? What do you hope it says about Black life or clarifies or articulates?
Um, I think I want people to see the reality of Black life and, that's the good. the bad, the ugly, the things that aren't talked about or spoken about. For instance, in my book, I write about in my debut book, Libre, I wrote about losing a sibling to suicide, and how I don't think society pays attention to mental health issues within the Black community. And I remember writing this particular poem because I was reading an article in the Washington Post that said young Black men are not likely to hang themselves and commit suicide, right? And I was just like, it's just like, how do you know? Like, and as someone who has been in the situation where someone close to them has done that, it's just like, okay, well, clearly this isn't an accurate perception of what is actually happening. And this is in the Washington Post. Like, you're telling people this as though it were a fact. And it's not, and so it's things like that that I think I want to bring awareness to, mental health in the Black community, how in these conversations, you know, certain things tend not to be spoken about and talked about, and that's something that's happening within the Black community too. There's an apprehension to talk about those things, to talk about mental health, to talk about, so it really sort of spirals out that way, and so those are some of the things that I try to talk about in my own work, to bring reference to bring awareness to the fact that, hey, these things are happening in our community too. They're not just happening in your community. Hello, so yeah.
So what do you think it is about poetry that makes that a place to do that? I mean, because you could imagine this is like an essayist or a journalist kind of project, but what is it particularly about poetry? Is it just simply like poetry is where you find your creative voice, or do you think there's something about being a poet that is particularly not suited to, but it has a particular importance or significance to this? Because that's a message that has everything from like a public service announcement on television to poetry and novels and everything in between. So what do you think poetry does with this kind of project of the good, the bad, and the ugly, as you put it?
Yeah, I think that poetry is very much sort of a liminal space. It's almost like it's like a veil between the past, the present, the living, the dead, all of these things. And I think that poetry ends up sort of being this vessel or this bridge between worlds, between, ideas, and being able to sort of write into that space, I think is very important. And I think that's why so many people identify with poetry. They can see themselves reflected in it. They can sort of trace sort of ancestral, you know, movements that are happening within poetry and etc. I mean, and for me, it's important, for those reasons as well. So I don't know. I think poetry is a tool, and it's a tool for me to connect with other people. It's a tool for me to understand other people, and so those are the reasons why I think I have, you know sort of accepted poetry as my vocation, because those those are the things I'm trying to do. I'm trying to connect with people. I'm trying to understand patterns. I'm trying to understand human behavior. I'm trying to understand like why this person is doing this and why they're not doing that, And so poetry sort of helps me to be able to sort of decipher the indecipherable is in some sense. And I think that's sort of what poetry is doing as well.
I love that. I'm glad I asked that follow up. When you say the relationship that people have to poetry, I think is something that, I mean, it's transformative. I mean, I teach poetry regularly, and the students who respond to it in a way that no other student responds to any other thing. There's something. I mean, there's a reason why in ancient Greece, Plato didn't like the poets, right? It's a kind of magical like effect, right? That sung speech has a way of transforming a relation to self and others, and so. When I say Plato didn't like something, I mean the thing he didn't like is probably great, because I have a philosophy PhD, so I'm like, this guy's been the enemy since day one. But But I really love that way of articulating like it not only as your vocation, but as having a particular relationship between, time and space, living and dead, memory and history. So, and liminal space, that's the way you put that. That's really wonderfully put. And you mentioned before when you were talking about your own, coming to write poetry about Black life. You mentioned another poet or two, and so I'm curious then to ask you to hear you reflect a little bit on how you see your writerly practice as a poet in relation to the history of Black poetry, but also to the future. Sort of where does it fit, but also what do you think it's opening up that's new, or what sort of boundaries do you think it pushes to say something new?
Yeah, I think I'm always in my debut, I was really trying to pay homage to the Black poets that I admired and that have really shaped me. So, like Toy Derricott, I also tend to write all my poetry in lowercase, kind of in the spirit of Nikki Giovanni and Lucille Clifton, and so I'm always thinking about you know, the Black poets that have influenced me and how I can also sort of bring their influence forward in my own work, and so that other people can learn about these poets too. When
Hmm.
people are like, "Okay, why are you doing that? Why are you doing this?" I'm like, "Oh, because Lucille Clifton did it, because Nikki Giovanni did it." And they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna go look at
Hmm.
that." And so I think that's important for the poetry to be maybe not obviously referential, but referential in some sort of sense so that there is like a lineage there.
Yeah.
So that's really important to me. In terms about moving it forward I've been working on new poems and trying to trying to work on new things, what have you, and the comment that I keep getting is that my poetry is becoming more political, which is interesting because I write about Blackness, but people are like, "Oh, your poetry is a little bit more political because 'cause I'm writing about, you know, um, the war in Iran or things of that sort,
Mhm.
right?" Suddenly that is political. And it's interesting that I don't think people tend to think writing or certain people don't tend to think that writing about Blackness is political, which is really weird. But
Yeah.
that's because that's not a comment that I sort of received on my book. Like, "Oh, this is very political," but it's for me, it is very political.
Yeah.
So it's interesting sort of defining what the word political means to different people.
Yeah. No, that
So
is
that's
that.
what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And sort of continuing with this sort of like looking at the past, and you're talking about the evoking, poets who, mean a lot or have been, had a certain kind of effect on your own creative practice. I'm interested in also then hearing you talk a little bit about what you think Black poetry, Black writing has done well historically, but also what it hasn't done particularly well.
Mhm. I think that Black poetry has been forced to break down doors and to make itself known, to make itself heard and understood and appreciated. I mean, I think it has been a long road to get to that
Yeah.
point. What I want to see, but I think a lot of what I've seen like, thinking about sort of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, is that people want Black poets to write about traumatic things that have happened to them. Like,
Hmm.
let me hear about your trauma. Let me hear about we wanna know what happened to you?
Yeah.
And so now I'm kind of in this space where I think maybe if we could be writing about Black joy, Black rest, Black peace, right? Not just having to feed the trauma wheel, because it seems like that's what people want to read, you know, um, or there's like an appetite for that, or had been sort of historically an appetite for people to sort of write about their suffering and trauma, and so I think what I would love is to see my fellow poets be able to write about the things that bring us joy, to be able to write about rest and peace and the future and what that might look like for us all. Not that I don't have any critique of
Yeah, no, I
anyone. I
agree.
just I think that, this is how we continue to evolve, is to sort of bring in the other side of that conversation too. Like, okay, we've talked about the suffering. We all know we've all been through things. Let's talk about the things that bring us joy. And I think for me, that's been one of the hardest things to write about is, I'm like, how do I write about things that bring me joy? Like,
That's
how do you
interesting.
do that?
Yeah.
Like, so I've been thinking about that as well.
Yeah, it's funny you said that right there at the end, because I was gonna ask you, what is the difference for you writing poetry about pain and writing poetry about joy or pleasure?
It's hard. I mean, I enjoy writing poems about pleasure, but joy is something different.
Mm,
Joy seems to be a different thing than pleasure. Pleasure seems to be not superficial, but it can be, whereas joy is just supposed to be sort of like this sort of all-encompassing thing,
mhm.
and so I'm interested to explore joy in a deeper way. Pleasure, I think I can do. Joy, I'm like, how do you do that? So I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, pleasure and joy, I mean, I said them together, but pleasure does have a sort of sense of not completely, but largely ephemeral, right? Whereas
Yes.
joy is I mean, it's of the order of, like, existential event. And
Yes.
existential events are hard to write about by definition. That's why it has a fancy word like existential attached to it.
Right. It's just like, what does that look like? What does that mean? I think I need to study joy.
Yeah. I can't tell you how to write about it, so but
It's just yeah.
I look forward to teaching people writing about it. That's that's my once
Yes.
removed from it. How do you think that sort of interest in just to draw back to something you had said before, how does that sort of project of you participating in what you had said, I'd like to see us finding ways to write about joy, with also this, your writing becoming more political, is it like the joy has a kind of political effect, or are these sort of two different modalities you find yourself working in?
I think there are two different modalities. I think I have an obligation to be recording what's happening right now and to be speaking to those things in the best way that I know how to speak to them. But that and joy is totally they're divorced from each other. But then a part of me thinks that the way in which we fight these structures and that we fight these systems and that we fight oppression is through activating joy inside of us,
Mhm, mhm,
and presenting joy and, letting the powers that be know that, like, you can do this and you can do that, and you can bomb this place and you can bomb that place, and you can take my rights here and you can take my rights there. But I'm gonna be trying to still pursue joy for
mhm,
myself. Like you're not going to get in the way of that,
mhm.
you know?
And that has a deeply political impact and effect, and I won't name the student because, I would wanna ask them first, but, in the sort of in the post-Ferguson uprising, classroom, I remember a student saying, because we were talking about, kind of a lot of the class kind of stopped in that moment to talk about what was going on. And it's where I learned a Black Studies classroom, which my field is very different than so many of my colleagues' classrooms. But we were really talking in really deep ways about this stuff. And there was this moment where the political protests went from rage and outrage and confrontation to people like setting up daycares and cooking and medical aid, singing, and real joy. I mean, it wasn't just pleasure, it wasn't escapism, it was real joy. And we were sort of talking about like how to think about these things all at once. And a student said, there's at some level nothing pisses off white racists more than Black people having a nice time.
Yeah.
And it like really stuck with me about this, so when I ask about sort of politics and joy, it's like on the one hand, it's like the documenting the moment and the you can't take this away from me, but that you can't take that away from me is exactly contesting the reach of this retrograde, terrible politics that we're living under. And so I love the political moment of saying, I'm not even going to cast this as political. I want to talk about it as joy and like what could be more political resistance and refusal than that alone. So,
Yeah, and I see a lot of Black people just being like, "You know what? We've done our part. We're just you guys figure it out." You know?
mhm.
And so it's just kind of like so and that's interesting too. That also feels very political, right?
Yeah.
You have just, Black people always having to mobilize and save this one and save that one, but it's like, "Wait, who's helping us? Is anybody coming? Who's helping us?" And so thinking about all of that and thinking about, like, self-care, is so important and joy and how we sort of find that joy and help it to grow, I think is really important and something that I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's hearing you talk about this is really interesting and edifying. And I mean, I just see it so much. I've seen so much of it in my classroom over the last year, especially among students, like really trying to think about that, exactly what you're saying about like, you guys figured this out, right? We've done our part historically in cross generationally. It does remind me as a kind of political, but also cultural practice of this line, I think famous, I don't know if famous in my little reading world, in an interview where Richard Wright said, there's no such thing as the Negro problem. There is only the white problem.
Mhm.
And I teach that line regularly and try to get the students to think about it. I'm like, that is a profound moment where he's just like, why are we always having to fix the problem? We are not the problem. Like, how about the people who are the problem fix the problem?
Well, that's what Baldwin he said similar things too, right?
He hated
He's like,
Richard Wright, but he loved that part.
you Yeah, he's like, you're looking at me, like I'm the problem when you're what you're seeing in me is a reflection of yourself,
Yep.
right? Like you're projecting on me the way you feel about yourself. That has nothing to do with me? And so I think about that a lot too, you know. And like Toni Morrison said, racism is just a distraction. People want to distract me from living my life, from having my joy, from minding my business. For instance, I remember this was not too long ago, but we have a festival down here. It's called Jazz Fest, and everybody goes, what have you. And the FBI discovered that there was this man who was planning to come to the festival and shoot all the Black people, right? And I remember talking to my mom and saying like, "Okay, like this is a MAGA person. You guys have the presidency, you have the House, you have the Senate. What else do you want? Like
And the Supreme Court.
what do you want?"
Yeah.
It was like what it's like nothing is enough, right? It's like
Yeah.
I'm like it's so insane to me. And I think about this so much, like what else do you want?
Mhm, mhm.
You have it all. Like, and it's not enough for you.
And I think in that moment of I don't know if separation is the right word, but that moment of withdrawal that you're talking about, like really thinking about what it means to write from that place rather than in an engaged like contestation space, but instead from that space of like refusal or withdrawal. As you said, that's where Morrison was like, I'm not writing about like, ghosts because I'm concerned about racism. I'm writing about this because I'm actually not, right? I'm trying to encounter these, as you said, these like veils between the living and the dead, between, gaps in time and relations. And so I love this portrait of writing from that space that you've drawn up here. That's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not a creative writer, but now you make me want to be one.
I think you should. You should take a poetry class this summer.
I should. We have an MFA program in the English department. I'm 49% in the English department, but
You
yeah.
should do it and see what comes out
Ugh.
just for fun. Why
Scary.
not? Why not?
That's terrifying.
What do you have
But you
to
are
lose?
absolutely right. Maybe I'll go to Prince George's Community College. That's where I'll go. Somewhere I
You
don't
could,
know.
or you could do something remote and that where no one knows you, you know, you can just like, I don't know. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll take like poetry workshops from like other countries.
Oh,
And
I
I'm like,
love
I don't know anyone in this class. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be anything embarrassing. It can just be a low key thing.
I am like somewhat intrigued though by like sitting in Lillian Yvonne Bertram's class, who's a friend of mine and colleague, and she has to grade my poem. I don't know what that's like, but maybe I should find out.
You
Um,
could, if the idea doesn't psych you out before you get there, you
yeah, why be scared? The end of the world. It's 98 degrees in mid-May in Maryland, so like, why not for the end of the world figure this
Why
out?
not? Why not?
I like this. You push me into this space, so if I do it, I
This
will
is
give you
my
all the.
purpose of being here.
There you go. Skye Jackson's the reason why. Well, let me ask you this last question, which is to really sort of center on your thinking and your imagination. Maybe you've in some ways already spoken to this, but what is the one issue or the one question you'd like to see artists and critics who are concerned about Black life be thinking about and asking?
I think I want us to be thinking about the future. And a lot of people that I talk to, and I'm 36, and my age range are just like, we don't know what the future is going to be like for us. There's no certainty, there's no sense of stability or anything like that, you know? And I think I want to push us to try to imagine a future because we have to, you know? We have to. As scary as it is, we need to do it. And so that's something that I'm thinking about now as I try to sort of like figure out like, hey, what will I be doing next year or the year after that? Or where will I be? And I'm like, I don't know. You know, I think when I look back at my parents in their 30s, they like had everything figured out, you know, and like my generation is just like looking at each other like,
Yeah.
and with a big question mark, you
Hmm.
know? And so I think a part of that is very terrifying, but then a part of it is it opens up a realm of possibility. And so I wanna be looking at it from that respect as well. Like, okay, maybe there's room for invention. Maybe there's room for something new and something positive, you know? And maybe it's not like where we've come from or where we've been. And maybe that's a good thing, you know? I don't know. So I'm thinking about that.
I like that. I mean, that's one of the promises of poetry is to summon a world into being. And so, what does it mean to
Yeah.
think about the future? Is to think about worlds that could be summoned into being. I mean, the end of colonialism, what was the post-colonial world going to look like? There's a reason why Campbell Brathwaite, Derek Walcott. I mean, there's a reason why these were the central people to start that response, because that's I think particular specialty of the poet. So I'm happy that you'll be thinking about that. We should all be thinking about it in whatever registers we work, because yeah, it couldn't be, everything about the future couldn't be more uncertain, but that's not a reason to not think about it, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like, oh, it's very soothing to not think about it, but I'm like, you know what? It's waiting for me. I have to think about it. You know, I can't not think about it. I need to be
The, fu-
thinking something about it.
the future is obstinate. I mean, it's just going to come no matter what we do. It
Yeah.
turns
I
out.
think the way I've been thinking about it is I've been thinking about future me, you know, and I've been thinking about what does future Sky need that past Sky could do today, you know?
Hmm.
It's kind of like when you accidentally leave $20 in like a winter jacket and then in December you're putting it on and you're like, "Oh my god, it's $20." It's like, "Thanks, past me for looking,"
Yes,
you
there you
know?
go. I like that analogy.
Like,
Yeah.
how can we do that but when it comes to our writing, when it comes to, like, our self-care, you know, thinking and so that's the way I've been trying to think about the future is trying to, like it's like a paper doll, you, like, pick it up and you put it on a blank space, right? I'm like, "Okay, I can, like, start thinking about that future because I am in that blank space," you know?
Hmm.
And so that's sort of like that's the beginning of my process with this. I don't know where it's gonna go. But that's how I've been thinking about it.
I love that. We'll hurry up and write so that we can all read it and appreciate it. So, I was really excited to have you on the podcast, and this is a really fantastic contribution to the series, Skye. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your insight, and all the questions that you've asked that I think are relevant to everybody listening, in so many ways. So, your time I appreciate, but your thoughtfulness and your generosity is just really, really. I'm so happy to have it on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, John. This has been awesome. I just appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and to be heard by all your wonderful listeners. And just it feels like a great way to start my summer is to spend it with you here today.
Hey, I like that. And tomorrow I'll be able to return the sentiment because otherwise I'm calculating grades tonight.
Yeah, go with God, my child.
doing the dismal math of grade calculation, but
And then the weekend emails of like, "Wait, what do you mean you gave me a D what?"
turns out when you don't come to class, your grade goes down.
I'm like, "Who are you? I don't know who you are."
Sorry, this is future me, the future me who's in summer mode.
Yes.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day and a fabulous summer too.
You too,
All
John.
right, take care.